was obviously um, I've been like watching your stream and stuff, and I wanted to talk to you when I saw your title. I think like don't get me wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like anti global warming, anti renewable fuels, pro oil, pro oil company no oil company subsidies. Is that right?
I think all of that is right except maybe the pro oil subsidies, although maybe I did put that in there. I've certainly
Okay.
argued for that before.
Okay. And then I want and then like with the Inflation Reduction Act and all the climate change portions of that, I thought it would be like a cool time to kind of like talk to you about that and just
Totally, yeah.
see how
No, I think it's
cool.
I think it's I mean, one of the reasons I've traditionally put anti-global warming in my title is first of all because it's hilarious because people don't know if I'm actually like like a liberal or a conservative when you're anti-global warming. Like a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah, I would say I'm anti global warming, so
right, right. But no, I think it's one of the most important issues just because the Democrats have politicized it so much and the Democrats are now using global warming as a basically like a cudgel to like hit the American people over the head with it to try to push Democrat party politics and obviously if you can justify a government policy based on global warming, then you can basically justify anything on global warming, and you nailed it with the Democrats justifying the Inflation Reduction Act, quote unquote, with global warming,
Mhm.
and they're continuing to use global warming as a justification for all of these policies. So that's one of the reasons I think it's so important, and have spent a lot of time
Mhm.
researching it, and kind of focus
Cool.
on it.
Perfect. So I guess from my background, I'm a PhD candidate in microbiology right now. I joined. I got interested into science because I wanted to help alleviate humans' impact on the environment, and I joined an algae biofuels lab in 2010, 2009, 2010, and then worked at a plant biotechnology company after that. And then now I went back into microbiology, and I'm using nanotechnology to kind of research how we can better algae biofuels and make them more efficient and better photosynthesis, handle stress a little bit better. And so I've been kind of like in the renewable fuel space for like 13 years now, but kind of like in the side of like making the organisms better, not so much in like the engineering, not so much in the climate science, but kind of like hopefully in the solutions edge of that.
Nice,
So
cool, good for you.
thanks, man. Appreciate that. I so I guess if we could like structure the conversation, if you don't mind, can I propose like a structure? Maybe we could talk about like the bigger problem of climate change or how humans are negatively impacting the environment, and then we can like drill down kind of like into solutions or technologies and that kind of thing, and then the Inflation Reduction Act and how that kind of molds it all together.
Sure.
Okay, cool. So like, I guess like, what are your thoughts on climate change?
I think climate change is a political position that people have used. It's got its start through politics. The whole global warming, man-made global warming theory started in the 80s in Great Britain as a way for Margaret Thatcher to go after the coal miner unions that were giving her a lot of political trouble. So, man-made global warming theory, aka climate change, started out as a political tool. I think it's stayed that way. I think the climate is always changing. I think the climate is one of the most complex systems on Earth that man could even hope to understand. I don't think we fully understand climate and every factor that goes into it. I think climate change is oversimplified by the left wing politics to try to make this notion that there's only one factor that goes into the Earth's temperature, and that's man-made CO2. And that man-made CO2 is there's just like a knob that you can just turn up and down, and it directly controls the temperature. And that these scientists that think that they know what the temperature of the Earth ought to be, I think is quite arrogant. The Earth has been quite a bit warmer than it is now. For example, during the medieval warm period, and things were just fine. So for Democrats to say that they know exactly what the Earth's temperature should be, and they know how to control the Earth's temperature, I think is wrong, and it's arrogant, and I think it's a completely political tool. And frankly, at this it's actually, since it started out as a political tool in the 80s, I think it's kind of morphed into more of a religion now, to where people are now seeking spiritual fulfillment by believing in global warming. And so people, I believe humankind and mankind has natural sort of inclinations towards spirituality and religious fulfillment. It's a need of every man. And so when you get these modern day leftists who are atheists, who don't believe in God, don't really believe in family, they're using global warming to basically fulfill themselves, and they tell themselves that, I'm a good person because I believe in global warming, and I'm a good person because I want to, stop using fossil fuels and stuff like that. So it started basically as like a political theory and has now moved more into a religion. Is what I think
Okay,
about it.
interesting. Okay. I mean, do you think that like broadly, like humans are having a negative impact on the environment?
Well, so I mean, it's funny that you bring up the you say the environment. That's a completely different question than climate.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I'm a traditional conservationist, and so I believe in conserving our forests. I come from Montana. I live an hour away from Yellowstone National Park. I live an hour away from one of the greatest wild preserved lands in the northern 48 states in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I spend a lot of time in nature. I go backpacking and camping and hiking. I spend time up at the cabin in the woods. I'm a big believer in traditional conservation, traditional environmentalism, clean air, clean water. One of my big complaints, one of my biggest criticisms of global warming is that it's actually changed our focus away from sort of traditional conservationism, traditional environmentalism, and it's focused us now on, we got to, cancel everybody's SUVs, ban SUVs. And it's like, I've been to the Amazon.
Hmm.
I spent a week
Oh
in the
wow.
Amazon with an indigenous tribe living in deep in the Amazon. And I believe in
Wow.
saving the Amazon rainforest and preserving our forests and stuff. And what I see is, basically, we could be spending our time and energy focusing on preserving the Amazon rainforest and practicing traditional conservationism and taking care of our national forests and doing things like that. And instead, we're debating, how quickly can we ban SUVs and how quickly can we ban cars and shit like that. So, I mean, one
Mm.
of my main criticisms of global warming is the fact that I think it's taken us backwards on more traditional environmental concerns.
Yeah, man, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, there's a I think like the scientific community has done a really poor job in communicating like all the different ways that we are impacting, and how I frame that, like humans negatively impacting the environment, is specific, and it's not just climate change, because I think when people hear climate change or global warming, they're thinking like, okay, I just wear like shorts instead of pants and stuff. They don't really like understand like, 2 degrees is doesn't seem like a lot, and I think that focusing on lived experiences and how people actually interact and are in love with nature is like what we should be doing. And we've kind of, like what you're talking about, traditional conservation, like we're actually abandoning by focusing so much on emissions and CO2. Although I think that it plays a central role scientifically, um, we're abandoning the things that we have done well in conservation biology before. So, like for example, there are big stories like pandas. The giant pandas was a focus on conservation, because bamboo forests were going extinct, and they wanted to preserve the entire ecosystem to not just save the pandas, but to save all the fish, all the microbes, all the insects, all the plants that are involved with that. And by kind of making the cute little panda the face of conservation for the bamboo forests, they it gave something for someone to attach to and feel something for. And as mammals, I think that we love kind of like that those eyes and those that face and that kind of stuff. And CO2 isn't, you can't have that personal relationship. There's nobody's like has a good experience with the CO2 molecule. It's
Yeah, I
just
mean,
kind of like fear mongering.
but I mean, you're basically, your statement there basically just presumed that, man-made global warming is this huge problem and it's this huge thing, and now you're basically like debating what's the best way for, left-wing scientists who support man-made global warming theory, what's the best strategy for them to approach this issue. Where I was more saying that the mere idea that, man-made global warming is the greatest threat that we've ever known, that in and of itself is, I think, a problem. And I mean, you bring up the panda situation, and of course the conservationism has failed because of the CCP in China and the Chinese Communist Party not doing anything to conserve their natural resources or their forests or their panda. That's why that's failed. And frankly, that connects to the global warming thing, because of course China and India are massively bigger CO2 emitters in the United States, and the United States CO2 emissions have actually gone down, recently, and China and India are going sky high, and all of these proposals, fail to take that into account.
Yeah, I mean there it isn't just like left wing like scientists that are proposing this though. It's a global problem that we're seeing on how humans are negatively impacting the environment, and we're finding it out from, and I could go on for 30 minutes without even talking about CO2. The acidification of the oceans, the warming of our oceans, the bleaching that happens, the endosymbiotic zooxanthellae that are the animals that live inside the corals. They're leaving at astronomical rates. We have just animal populations are down 70% in the last 50 years. You have wetlands, which is like an entire ecosystem in and of itself. That's actually going down. Like all like of the wetlands that have gone extinct in the last that have gone extinct, 90% of those wetlands have gone extinct within the last 50 years. So I mean, and that's not has nothing to do. I mean, a lot of it probably has nothing to do with CO2. It has people, people just want to live near the oceans. They want to live near the rivers. So they naturally kind of like go there. And the first thing to go and to be bulldozed is wetlands. It's kind of just, it's because of human activity. All those things that we notice, bird migrations, which is something that has actually been, something that's been going on for hundreds of years, not just since the 80s. We track bird migrations. That's completely off now. They're going to higher elevations and more northern latitudes because it's the temperature is more moderate there. The insects that bloom at the same time as flowers, which is called phenology. It's like the timing of nature. That's all off now because you have plants that are blooming out of season. And all of this kind of comes together, and this is why it's a scientific consensus, is because it's physics, chemistry, biology, all these different fields using completely separate methods are able to kind of like coalesce and come together and be like, what's the dividing factor here is like human activity.
Okay, so basically everything you just mentioned, though, like I've heard other people say that's caused by man-made global warming. And so when you say, oh, the timing's off, or birds are migrating farther north or something like that, that's okay. So the climate is changing. The climate is always changing. That's a totally different question than saying this is all due to man-made CO2. And then even if it is all due to man-made CO2, then that's a totally different question about whether the government should take away our liberties and freedoms to try to address this issue. And so, I mean, if you want to take issue with the fact that I say it's left-wing scientists that are pushing this, I mean, you're free to do so. There is no scientific consensus on this issue. One of the reasons I'm very skeptical of the man-made global warming theory is because of some of the world's top climate scientists have disputed the man-made global warming theory. There's lists and lists and lists of some of the world's top climate scientists who dispute this theory. And look, I've listened to hour-long presentations of scientists who dispute man-made global warming, and I've listened to hour-long presentations of scientists that argue for global warming, and I look at them and I judge them based on the evidence and what they've presented and their arguments, and make up my own mind. But, to the extent that there are scientists out there that believe in man-made global warming that are not left-wingers, I'd suggest that they're probably a little bit naive and have maybe even been duped. Because this is 100% a political thing, and of course the scientists are getting paid money from Democrats in government, and so they have a huge financial incentive to continue to say man-made global warming is this huge problem, and we need Democrats in government to deal with this, and we need more grant funding to study this and stuff like that. So you've got a huge financial. It's a global warming is a multi-billion-dollar industry. If you go and look at the history of government funding of global warming research, it started out in the 80s, late 80s, maybe $1 million grant here, maybe $1 million grant there, and it steadily increased to today. It's literally tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars are going to study this stuff. And you've got scientists who have talked about this, but basically, like, if you want to study, let's say you want to study squirrels, okay, and you apply for a grant about like how squirrels utilize trees to do XYZ or something, you apply, you're not going to get it. If you want to study squirrels and you say how climate change is impacting squirrels, boom, all of a sudden you get your grant, you get all your money. And frankly, I think the government interference in science and government funding of science and all the corruption that comes when you get government involvement in science and that exact type of thing is really done a huge disservice to science in general.
I guess, like, do you think that there was, like, how could the science become less political then? Like, how could we research an observation and about something, like, let's say that the yeah, like, let's yeah, I mean, how would you propose the science funding and the research to be done to be less political?
Yeah, I mean, I would number one try to get the government out of it as much as possible, and try to get the financial incentive removed. And so there's a lot of ways to fund scientific research, a lot of ways that scientific research has been funded throughout history, including private funding, straight up private funding, through sort of philanthropic, sort of nonprofit funding. There's obviously universities have funding that doesn't come directly from grant money. And then businesses also fund scientific research. And so I don't think you need, you know, tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars being thrown around by politicians, Democrat politicians, particularly, that create this really sort of nasty incentive for the science to come out one particular way. And of course, we have evidence of scientists manipulating the data to try to show more global warming. Email gate. I'm sure you've heard of the email gate. But
Hmm.
we've got actual emails showing that this particular subject area has been corrupted.
Yeah, it's just like the problem with, specifically, like, businesses funding science is that, for research, it's hard because there's no profit motive for just figuring out, if something's happening. The fundamental baseline research that everyone goes off of um, isn't profitable, and it probably won't be. Like, for example, one of my favorite papers that's come out in the last 10 years is actually identified, like, a mass extinction event of sharks that's happened between other mass extinction events, and there's nothing linked to it. We have no idea why it was like 50 to 60% of sharks just went extinct, and that kind of, like, basic research, you can't really, no company is going to go out there and just research that because it can't be patented. There's no biotech that's going to be spun off from it. There's going to be nothing profitable from it, so there's no incentive for a business to do it.
Yeah, that's certainly true with certain types of science. A lot of other science there is quite a bit, and there's actually been quite a bit of scientific breakthroughs that have been done because of for-profit companies doing research. But yeah, I mean I agree that's not all of it. You can have universities. Universities can certainly fund research. Nonprofits, different types of organizations like that can fund research. I think that's all fine and good. You could certainly address those issues through that. You don't need government taxpayer dollars being funneled into this multi-billion-dollar industry.
I mean, but those public institutions, how are they going to get money? There's just from private philanthropy. uh, just asking for money?
That's how most of them get their money. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, most the most science like funding comes from the government,
Right.
and well, that's actually the DoD that does it. Over $90 billion of science funding comes from the DoD, and it's the number one national security threat that they've identified is, the sustainability and renewability of us being able to live here. And that's why they put so much money into, renewable fuel research, and specifically the Navy and the Air Force actually is because they put a lot of money into my field, because that, algae can actually grow the high octane jet fuel that they need in order to fly their planes. So you can't really do that with ethanol or corn. So that's why they spend so much money. Full disclosure, I got a fellowship through the DoD, so for my research, and I've had multiple labs that I've worked at be funded by the DoD
Yeah,
before.
for sure. I mean, I'm sorry if you want, like, the fact that they're coming out and saying, "Oh my gosh, global man-made global warming is the number one national security threat." That
Hmm.
mean that just causes me to totally disregard anything else they say. That's just on its face just so preposterous and so ludicrous when you look around the world and you see what's going on with the CCP in China and
Hmm.
Russia and the global march of socialism and communism and authoritarianism all around the world, and what the CCP is doing with the Belt and Road Initiative and their military adventures and militarizing space. And I mean, it's laughable to say that man-made global warming is some huge national security threat. And look, the government or the DoD is not immune from politics. To
Hmm.
suggest that,
Agreed.
oh my gosh, the DoD and the military funded this, that means it must be great and perfect. No, there's still corruption in that as well. Um, and I mean, the fact that the Department of Defense has come out and said man-made global warming is the greatest national security threat, I think, is evidence that they've been corrupted and that they should be not listened to and they should be disregarded.
Hmm. Okay, yeah. My point there was just to kind of like show that there's a broad amount of people that kind of like agree on this, that it's not just like scientists that are in this area. I mean, it's kind of like one of those things where, you know I mean, you'd agree that science obviously has existed before climate change, and ecology and, biology as a larger field has like existed, and there's like a body of evidence that's a body of research and stuff that's before that, obviously, right? Or would that be apolitical in your mind, or would it still be politicized?
Oh, I mean, I would encourage everybody to view everything with skepticism and never. And frankly, okay, so your main argument's a logical fallacy. I mean, to to
Okay.
to argue to argue that, hey, man-made global warming is real and it's this huge problem because look at all of these people that agree with it. That's literally like one of the classic logical fallacies. Simply because a lot of scientists, and it's an appeal to authority, it's appeal to numbers. It's literally a classic definition of a logical fallacy. So, and that's another reason. Another, frankly, that the fact that one of the main arguments in favor of global man-made global warming being this huge problem is a literal logical fallacy, I think is evidence of why the theory is wrong. I mean, if this theory was so valid and so great, you would not have to resort to logical fallacies. You would not have to resort to saying, "Oh, there's a consensus," when there's not, pushing false information to put out this idea that there's a consensus when there's not, using logical. Instead, if this was such a wonderful theory that was so rock solid and we all agreed on, there was all this evidence, you
Mhm.
would actually address it on the merits. You wouldn't just do an appeal to authority and then try to shut people down, because that's ultimately what the end result of this whole argument is, oh my gosh, this is a consensus, nobody can disagree with this, you're not allowed to disagree with this is we're using this logical fallacy. And then anybody, and of course over 50% of Americans don't agree with this notion that we're all going to be dead in 10 years from man-made global warming. And I think 60 or 70% of Americans don't believe it's the most important national security threat. So you can use this logical fallacy and appeal to authority and talk about a scientific consensus that doesn't exist all you want. You're not convincing people of it.
Mhm.
Maybe, I would certainly agree that most scientists agree with the theory of man-made global warming for all of the reasons that I've said. There's financial incentives for them to do so. Um, but that doesn't change the fact that a majority of Americans don't buy it.
Like what would be the evidence needed in your mind, or like the experiments, or like what would have to be presented in order to show that it is happening and that there is a consensus on that?
Well, I don't give a shit if there's a consensus or not. What I look at
Okay.
is the actual merits, the actual substance of the points. Like I don't know about you, but I don't believe things just because a lot of other people believe it. I believe things if there's evidence for it and if it's true. And so
Okay.
this notion that that if you could just convince people there's a consensus, then suddenly they're going to believe it, I think is false. Like people don't want to just be told there's a consensus and be told to sit down and shut up. You can't question this and you can't talk about this. You're stupid. You're dumb. Everybody else disagrees with you. Shut up. That's not what's going to convince people. What I would need in order for me to, I mean, what would you want me to believe? Would you want me to believe that man-made global warming is the greatest national security threat? We're all going to be dead in 10 years unless we ban SUVs. Do you want me to believe that there's only one factor that goes into the Earth's temperature? Do you want me to believe that humans know the exact correct temperature of the Earth and that the humans should try to control the Earth's temperature? Like, what would you want me to believe?
Um, I guess like that humans are having a negative impact on the environment.
You keep saying the environment.
Yeah.
That's a little bit misleading, I think, because you're not talking about the environment. You're talking about the climate.
No, I am. I'm specific, and this is one of the problems that I think that we in the conversation about climate change is that we're focused too narrowly on that. We're focused too much on emissions. We're focused too much on CO2, and we've disregarded kind of like all these animals that are dying, all these ecosystems that are in not good good shape, and that's what I think that is more relatable to people, like you going camping and you going um, you've seen over time, if you've gone hunting and stuff, that you've seen that there probably is less animals and plants out there, and it's like there is a change that might be happening that you're experiencing. I want to talk about your lived experience with nature and
Yeah.
the
Well,
things that you like about it.
we've got less elk and less deer here, but that's because Democrats wanted to reintroduce wolves, and the wolves
Hmm.
have been killing all the elk and the deer.
Okay, but I mean, do you think, like, when you go out, I mean, are you seeing less insects, less birds, like more than just elk?
Um, I honestly can't say that I've necessarily experienced that, but even if I had, I would not
Hmm.
attribute it to man-made CO2 emissions. Not at all.
Okay.
I think the environment is constantly changing. I think humans and animals are exceptionally good at adapting to certain things.
Hmm.
I think there's to say, oh, birds are migrating further north than they used to. It's like, okay, well, yeah, there's been some warming. Of course, most of the warming occurred prior to the 1940s, and of course, there was a 20-year pause in global warming in the 2000s during a time of record-breaking CO2 emissions, which can't be explained. Um,
Hmm.
at least I've never heard a pro man-made global warming person, explain it. But I mean, to go back to your earlier question, like, what would I need? Like, I would need
Yeah.
a bunch of different questions answered and
Okay.
explanations offered. And if the pro global warming scientists were able to, explain exactly what caused the ice ages and why the ice ages went away, if they were able to explain exactly how and why the sun impacts, if they could explain multi-thousand-year cycles that occur on the sun, if they could explain the thousand-year cycles that occur in our oceans, if they could explain why the Earth was better off when it was warmer during the medieval warm period, if they could explain why there was a 20-year pause in global warming at a time of skyrocketing CO2, if they could explain why every major climate prediction of the last 50 years has turned out to be wrong. Um, if they
Hmm.
I could just keep going on and on and on with different inconsistencies. None of those, of course, are ever explained. Every time you bring up one of these things, it's just, oh, there's a consensus. You can't question it. There's a consensus. You can't. No. That's you can't bring that up.
Okay. Yeah, I
It's
mean,
not.
I
It's not
guess like
compelling.
I mean, how do you know that those ice ages existed in the first place? I mean, I see no ice age, ice blanketing North America. So why are you going to believe them about the scientists about the ice age?
Um, well, I mean, I guess sitting here today, um, I can't say 100% that there were ice ages, but it's in I guess in all of the sort of explanations that I've seen, and ice core records and things like that, um, and seems to make sense. But I guess I'm not sitting here today. I wouldn't go in and say 100% that we had ice ages. I mean, that's part of the problem with global warming too. Is this sort of false certainty? There's zero humbleness. There's zero recognition of the weaknesses of all these models. There's zero recognition of the limits of our. And it was frankly, you saw the same thing with COVID, where these scientists refuse to admit that they don't know everything. And then you know, 2 years into the pandemic, we find out that COVID spreads via aerosols, not water droplets, like a fundamental, basic thing that scientists were completely wrong on for years and years of COVID. And yet at the time, they never would even admit that they had some misunderstandings. And it's the same with these global warming scientists. It's like the arrogance to say that we understand this 100% and nobody can question it. This is a settled issue. That's not science. That goes against everything that science stands for. So again, these pro global warming scientists, they say and do these things that are huge red flags. They use logical fallacies. They try to shut down debate. They refuse to recognize any weaknesses in their position. They reject traditional science, which is to question everything. All of those things tend to show that what they're pushing is bullshit.
Yeah, man, I don't think. I mean that. I don't. I mean, I joke that like the only people that speak in absolutes are Siths and non-scientists. I don't think that there's any science. A scientist is never going to be able to
You
tell
said
you
there's a
an absolute.
consensus. You literally just
There
said
is,
there's a
but there's
consensus, and
always
then you said
yeah,
all these things are
there
happening
is.
because of man-made CO2, and there's a consensus on it. And there's
There
and
is a consensus, but that it could still be wrong, right? We could still figure out maybe it's some other thing that's somehow
okay,
making
so
it. It's never going
how
to be
can
100%. No
how can you
scientist is going to be 100%.
so how can you say there's a consensus when you have some of the world's top climate scientists that disagree with man-made global warming theory?
Because they haven't been able to demonstrate and show why the hypotheses why like humans if humans aren't impacting all of these different things, then what's the mechanism that links them all
Okay.
together?
So
That's the
you
question.
say it's a consensus, even though there's a lot of climate scientists that disagree with it, simply because you just don't think the climate scientists that disagree with it have done a good enough job. So you just reject them and don't even include them in your analysis when you say there's a consensus. So you're just
No, I
rejecting out of hand like lots of climate scientists.
no, I've seen I have read their reports and stuff. There's one out of Berkeley. There's a physicist, a Berkeley professor that's a physicist, I believe, that looked at sunspots. He looked at there was another um, you know, but the hypothesis was that basically it was too close to the CO2 measurements were too close to cities. Cities are going to have more emissions, so the CO2 levels are going to naturally be higher. But if you actually read the Keeling curve, the original paper that was where the hockey stick graph kind of comes from, I mean they even talk about that. They specifically make that observations and take those readings in Hawaii because of that. So I think that and even he was he actually went and tried to study this and tried to show why sunspots and why he believed that a lot of the consensus was wrong, and then he wound up changing his mind. He wrote a New York Times opinion article about how and why he changed his mind. So
You understand that the hockey stick graph has been debunked, right?
I mean, how the Keeling curve is it's an observation that happens that the CO2 levels are going up, and they're declining since the United States has been declining since 2000 for emissions per capita, but it's CO2 is still very much increasing.
Yeah, but the
we're
hockey
taking
stick graph that came from Al Gore's, or was at least popularized by Al Gore's movie. Of course, of course, Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, the what used to be the Bible for global warming fanatics, much of that movie has been proven to be false information and debunked. And of course, Al Gore made numerous climate predictions that turned out to be false. Again, there's been 50 or 60 climate change, global warming predictions over the years. We were supposed to never see snow again by 2020. The glaciers in Glacier National Park they were supposed to be gone by 2020. The
Hmm.
hockey stick graph said, we're all going to be dead in 10 years. Al Gore made numerous predictions. Those have all turned out to be false. They literally, just last year, they literally had to go into Glacier National Park and change. The National Park Service had to go into Glacier National Park and change the billboards in Glacier National Park to change it from saying that the glaciers are going to be gone in 2020 because of man-made global warming. Because guess what? 2020 came and went. And the glaciers in Glacier National Park weren't gone. So again, like,
Hmm.
there's just all of these problems, and none of them have ever been adequately addressed or explained.
I mean, a lot of the IPCC models have been wrong, but they've been wrong because they didn't estimate that the CO2 ppm levels were going to rise as much as they are. And we can test, specifically that CO2 because of how, you know, radiation decay happens and that kind of stuff. We can, the over time the neutrons fall out of the nucleus, so we can, through isotope dating, we can actually see that the CO2 that's in the atmosphere matches the carbon that's actually inside the ground. And that's what the bigger problem is that we're taking the carbon from the ground and we're putting it up into the sky. And we know that that's happening, and we know that human activity is the cause of that, right? I mean, how else would 700 million or 500 million year old carbon get into the atmosphere?
I mean, I don't think anybody disputes that there's carbon emissions. The issue is
Okay.
is it bad or not?
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of like my broader idea is like maybe we could start talking about like humans impacting the environment rather than like just focusing on climate change, I guess. And that's kind of my frustration with climate scientists and scientists in general, because we just focus so much on CO2 ppms, and it's like we're ignoring ecosystem health, we're ignoring the animals dying off, we're ignoring the ecosystems that are disappearing because of human activity. And once we've kind of like noticed that, then we're going to get people that are actually invested into the environment, and then they're naturally going to lower their emissions and be more sustainable. Because ultimately, right, humans have to live sustainably on the environment or
Yeah, but
in the
when
environment.
you again, I think it's a little bit misleading what you're saying there and what you're doing, because
Okay.
you're trying to say that, okay, no, I'm really worried about humans' impact on the environment and degrading ecosystems, but your underlying theory for that is that it's the man-made CO2 emissions that are impacting the climate that are then impacting the ecosystems and people's daily life. You're not talking about traditional pollution, heavy metal
I am.
pollution from
I
from
am.
plants and stuff like that. And the reality is of course, is that the United States, in particular, we have done a fantastic job of regulating traditional pollutants, and this is
Mm-hmm.
another sort of one of those
That's
red
good.
flags. This is one of those red flags, I'll explain here, that shows me that the American left is not serious when it comes to this man-made global warming stuff, because the United States used to have a lot of pollution, traditional heavy metal pollution from metal refineries and oil refineries and coal and you name it. And of course, in the 70s, we passed the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, and the United States has done an incredible job of um, addressing traditional pollution. And now in the United States, we have some of the cleanest water in the world. We have some of the cleanest air in the world. We don't have toxic pollutants in our environment. The reality is that a lot of other countries do, including China and India. I've been to China. I've been to India. They're absolutely disgusting places to be because of their pollution, and not CO2. I'm talking real pollution, heavy
Yeah,
metals, shit
I
like that
agree.
that's in the air. And so
Yeah.
but so if you guys, if people really truly cared about the environment, you would be spending all of your time trying to address real pollution in China and Russia and India, and you'd be trying to focus on preventing the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. Instead, you want to sit here and ban SUVs in the United States, and you want to take away American freedom, and you want to waste government money in the United States. It's like that shows me that you're not serious. That shows me that you're not operating in good faith. And I don't mean you personally. I
No,
mean
I
the
understand.
American left, the scientists that are pushing this. If you guys really cared, if you really truly
Hmm.
cared about this stuff, you would be recognizing the United States as a world leader in clean air and clean water, and you should be pushing China and India and everybody else to adopt the same things that the United States has and control their pollution and deal with these traditional pollutants. Instead, there's this obsession with banning cars, preventing Americans
Hmm.
from driving cars, and taking away freedoms, and putting in regulations, stuff like that. That to me shows bad faith, and not a serious concern for the environment, more of a concern about power and control.
I totally agree with you about the caring about the pollution. I mean, I think it's a huge win for uh, like removing lead from gasoline, like for example. That's a huge one in the 60s and 70s. If you look at the percentage of you know like the developmental damage that could have been happening to the new study said half of the United States was basically growing up in a time that had toxic lead levels in the air. It's just insane, and it happened because of Los Angeles and Riverside County. Los Angeles County was basically exporting all this, the nitrates and the bad air into Riverside County, and they measured that at UC Riverside, and it was actually a good example of like how local politics and local legislation can actually be exported, nationally, and looking at um, yeah, it's a huge win for that, and I think that if we zoom out on how humans are negatively impacting the environment, if you care about pollution and that's like your number one thing, then like go for that. I think that you're right in that people are too focused in on the CO2 metric and emissions and stuff like that, and that's where the SUV bans and stuff come from, rather than caring more generally about pollution and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if that's what you care about, then that's fine. I know people in my life personally that install wind turbines. They're engineers for wind turbine companies, but they don't care about, they don't think that humans are having a negative impact on the environment, but they think that engineering's cool, and they think that wind turbines are really cool because they really like sustainable energy. So, that's just like a win for me in my book, because they're increasing our ability to live sustainably on Earth. Humans living sustainably on Earth through renewable fuels, which I think are really cool.
Okay, so then, but why are you then so interested then in, like, preaching man-made global warming and trying to figure out, like, why don't the American people believe in man-made global warming theory, and how do we address this misinformation about man-made global warming, and why we,
Mhm.
we need to learn why do these Americans not believe in this, and how can we address it and stuff like that, if you're just totally cool with people not agreeing with it and focusing on other issues.
I mean, I think that like I'm not like preaching anything. If I want to give people the tools to act, and um, if they care about the issue, hopefully we, people can care about the environment. But as like where they are, if there's a lot of different ways of impacting the environment positively. I'm not trying to like push an ideology or authoritarian. I think that you're right on that. By the way, there's too many people nowadays on both sides, I would argue, but we don't have to get into politics, but like preaching like, hey, we have to abandon democracy. This is our time. We have to go through authoritarian means. And I'm a huge fan of democracy personally. And I don't think that like just some ham-fisted like, doctrine is going to be, how we should do things. We should talk to people where they are, how they are, and we should convince them that like the quality of life is going to get better with renewable fuels and sustainable living, rather than forcing them to live, without meat or whatever, whatever people think.
Yeah, cool, great, I like that.
Nice. I want to talk about like China and India though, and I think that that's a good point. And I think that this comes to the problem with a lot of the emission centered talk thinking about the issue only like that, because it comes into this weird NWO, like who's going to regulate China and India and legislation and binding regulation and stuff, when it's like, I feel like we can kind of just work on ourselves and work on our own, environment and our country to live sustainably and create and renewable fuels that we don't have to rely on foreign countries for and importing that. And that's like, by the way, why the DoD cares about it so much. So I don't I think that like basically um basically like focusing only on emissions gets us into this slippery slope thing where it's like these NWO one world government solutions, and it's like that. I don't feel like that's productive.
Okay, so if you just okay, so let's just think about what you just said. Like you
Hmm.
think that that we should just focus on ourselves, and that if we just focused on renewable energy and improving ourselves, then our lives would be better, right?
I do think that, yeah,
Okay.
the people, yeah.
Then there's but the problem with that is that it's not true, and that that renewable energies are technologically not there. We still rely, I think, 60, 70, 80, in between 60 to 80% of all of our energy comes from fossil fuels. The
Hmm.
technology is not there to replace all of that with windmills and solar panels. And if life was just going to be awesome if we all just built windmills and solar panels, then you'd have private money going into it. You wouldn't be having to have the government step in and force this on people. And so, look, if there's new renewable energy technology, I'm all in favor of it. I love capitalism. I love entrepreneurism. I have full faith and full confidence in the free market system and
Yeah.
entrepreneurism and capitalism to develop new technologies and green energies and everything like that. What I'm not in favor of is that theory is being used as a political weapon to try to empower the government, empower Democrats, and force people to pay higher electricity. Every American is now paying higher monthly electricity bills because of this renewable energy being forced on people, and that's not okay. You're actually making people's lives less good. You're actually ruining people's lives. There's a lot of Americans right now that are behind on their electricity utility bills and are in danger of having their electricity shut off. I think there's like 10 million households in the United States who are in danger of having their electricity shut off by the utilities because they can't afford to pay monthly electricity prices. And a huge percentage of that is because of forcing this green energy and renewable energy on people. So look, if it's this wonderful thing and it's going to improve our lives, great. Then the private sector will adopt it, the free market will take it, and that's great. The problem is it's not. It's actually ruining our lives. You're actually having to have the government come in and force people to do this stuff and to ban fossil. Democrats are openly calling to ban fossil fuels. You're going to send people back to the dark ages. You're going to literally make their lives horrible. You're going to destroy their lives. Like, that's not the reality of what you're saying is not the reality. And that's it's become a political issue because the Democrats, the left wing, want to utilize this man-made global warming theory to then control every aspect of our lives and to force these renewable energies before they're technologically ready. And
Hmm.
so this whole notion that, hey, let's just focus on ourselves, let's just make our own lives better, is great if that was the case, but it's not.
Yeah, I think the idea is to try to, as the world kind of goes into this more renewable and sustainable living off of the environment, as opposed to kind of like humans on top and just taking all the nutrients and resources from the environment, and we'll just live separate from it. I think the idea is to kind of like create those jobs and those factories and that manufacturing in the United States so that we're able to um, kind of like go forward and contribute. And as the century moves on, and as more countries want to transition there, then they can start buying more American products, and we can be exporting these products that people can buy. And these are jobs to install them, jobs to maintain them, that are going to be there for a really long time. And they're going to be
That's
good
great.
paying jobs. So,
That's
mhm,
great. Why can we just do that with private money? Do you have to
mhm.
use taxpayer money? Do you have to use government power and the iron fist of a centralized federal government, or can't? What you said is great. Like, and go do it. Go
Mhm.
start a company. Do your private. Why the obsession with using taxpayer dollars and using the government with the iron fist of a centralized federal government to force this on people? If it's all this wonderful thing, just go do it.
Yeah, this is a great point. I think what you've raised is the need, and I would argue actually the technology is there for us to live sustainably, renewably off of the environment. It's just that we are in the like lab and the pilot scale stage, but we're not at that national level of production on this stuff. And I think that's what, it's hard, and it's that scale up isn't necessarily where a lot of private companies want to be. They want to be at the place where they're actually able to kind of like invest in, and it just goes forward. So like a good example of this is actually like algae biofuels. Again, I'm biased, I work in algae biofuels. um ExxonMobil giving $700 million, I think, two times now, to J. Craig Venner in San Diego with synthetic genomics to try to, and they've more than doubled the amount of fats that can actually come from algae in order to make it more renewable. Basically, the productivity of the algae ponds, increase that. So there is a lot of private money going into that. I mean, one thing
Yeah,
that I
exactly.
personally go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say. I mean, exactly, and that's how it should be. That's not really addressing the question, though, which is
Yeah.
if there is private money, and there will be private money,
Hmm.
and human technological progress will progress to where the point where I disagree that the tech is there for us to live off of this. There was just a study that was released yesterday that said we need 350 new open pit mines to get the lithium, cobalt, graphite, and nickel to make electric vehicle batteries. And of course, windmills are they don't last very long. They have to be replaced. You can't recycle them. They're
Hmm.
overflowing landfills. Solar panels are the same thing. All made in China mostly, um, and we simply do not have the amount of mines, open pit mines, that we would need. And of course, the people promoting this stuff aren't calling for us to have 350 new mines in the United States, which is what we would have to have. So regardless of that, though, but like, so I challenged you about, if this is also wonderful and great, why do you have to have government money? Why do you have to have the power of the centralized federal government forcing this on people? And your response
Hmm.
was, well, there is private money going into it, and I think that's great, but it doesn't answer the question.
It's just not at that scale up, that national scale up like stage right now. I mean, for example, the electric vehicles and you're talking about a lot of solar and electric, which is, you're right, they need photovoltaics, the rare earth minerals that are required to run the machinery, the motherboards inside of them, and then also the batteries too, right? But there's a lot of, it's called non-carbon renewable fuel sources. So we're talking, wind, solar, nuclear, and hydro. So those are like three big things that can be used, and it's all kind of like a, all of the above strategy. So for example, like California is doing 64% of its electricity now that are from non-carbon sources. um, I think that you're right, the mining and stuff is a problem. I personally, I don't understand like why we haven't transitioned to algae based biofuels for our cars. We don't have to buy all new electric cars. You don't have to be forced to buy an electric vehicle in the next, however, 2050 or whatever it is. You can convert your existing gas car to run off of renewable biofuels, and then we can also use the infrastructure that already exists in this country. So we're talking about gas stations, tankers, gas lines, all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't have a lot of the problems that batteries do, because it's called a fungible fuel. Basically, the energy of the fuel is in the bonds itself, the chemical bonds. So you don't have to have that chemical gradient that exists inside of a battery, which makes it hard in order to maintain that gradient, which then makes battery technology harder to sustain over a long period of time. That's why kind of like that's why a hydroelectric dam is actually the best battery there is, because you can maintain that gradient a lot easier.
All right. So you mentioned hydro and nuclear,
Hmm.
but uh, the problem is that the left wing, the Democrats, the global warming folks are not. They don't support nuclear power, and they don't support hydropower. It's only windmills and solar panels, and frankly, that's because of the financial ties between the environmental movement and the windmill and the solar panel industry. There's an incredible amount of windmill and solar panel companies that have financial ties to the Democrat Party, and the Democrat Party's financial ties to windmills and solar panel companies. And you saw that, for example, with Solyndra, with Obama, where $500 million taxpayer money goes to a solar panel company and ends up just being wasted and stolen, et cetera, et cetera. So that again, the nuclear power, that's another red flag for me that says you Democrats are full of shit. Like
Mhm.
if you guys really cared about global warming, you would be out there calling for nuclear power plants every day. They don't support nuclear power plants. We're not building nuclear power plants. Democrats will not allow us to build more nuclear power plants. And I'm all in favor of nuke. I'm pro nuke. And
Mhm.
I think we ought to be building more nuclear power plants. But for some reason, the Democrats won't allow us to build more nuclear power plants, which kind of tells me that their arguments about global warming are being made in bad faith.
Yeah, I agree that nuclear is a good thing to have to use in certain scenarios. For example, highly dense cities, or countries like Japan, New York is going to have, like, there's not enough space for mass solar arrays, mass wind arrays, so it doesn't really make sense to in order to do it, it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to
Oh my
do
gosh.
wind and
The
solar there.
the wind and solar are just such a blight on the landscape. They take up so much land mass. Like there's a big solar farm here in Judith Gap in Montana.
Hmm.
Which there's these two mountain ranges. There's the big snowy mountain range, and then there's a Little Belt mountain range, and in between is called the Judith Gap, and there's this really windy area. And man, I drive that, and I drive up there, and I'm trying to enjoy the mountains and the landscape, and it's just full of these just ugly as hell windmills.
Yeah, I mean, it's living in Southern California, it's the oil bobbers, over here. So it's kind of I guess you win some, you lose some. Um, you know, I, I think you can't ever we're not ever going to be able to ban any type of combustion engine ever,
I hope
because
that's right. Yeah.
airplanes exist, right? So airplanes, you can't run a 747 on motors, because you basically don't have the power. In order to get more power, you need more batteries. More battery adds more weight, which means more power is needed. It's just cyclical, and it goes down. It doesn't make any sense. And then also construction vehicles, like really heavy duty construction vehicles, you're always going to have them needing to be uh, some type of combustion engine. But there's really no reason why those combustion engines can't be renewable fuels. So, there actually have been 747s that have flown on algae blends of fuels. And I mean, this is a tangible goal too. So back in 2010, when I first got into this, um, I was going into a lot of DoD presentations about this, and they were talking about the importance of this stuff. And they were if they scaled it out at the time, that basically you would need algae ponds the size of Texas in order to have the entire country run sustainably and renewably off of those algae ponds. So we would no foreign imports of oil. We wouldn't have to mine anymore, onshore or offshore. And then since then, the last 10 years, it's decreased dramatically. So because of molecular biology, genetics, CRISPR bioengineering, we're basically able to make these algae now. So if you think about, ironically, it's the size of Montana. So that's also so the size of Montana now is the space that we need in order to run algae biofuels, which ironically is actually the exact same square acreage of how much we use right now in the United States for corn. So corn ethanol, and this kind of gets into, like, why aren't we using algae biofuels? Why aren't we doing this? If this exists, why aren't we using existing technologies? The corn lobby is extremely strong in this country, and I mean, a part of it is because of a bill that Bill Clinton passed that made it so that our gasoline, 10% of it has to come from corn ethanol. They take the corn, they took the sugars from the corn, they feed it to yeast that makes ethanol. They take that ethanol and then they put it into your gas. Gas is actually less energy dense than gasoline, so they're actually diluting our gasoline, and it's actually a huge problem. So we're basically using, and what's crazy is how much of our country, how much of our corn is used for food, which is about 10% for humans. Over 50% of it is for stocks for cattle and that kind of stuff, and then the 40% is used for uh, that corn ethanol. So it's a huge amount of our country that's actually being used for something that's not doesn't make any sense scientifically, environmentally, engineering wise. It just
Okay.
doesn't make any sense.
So, how
Hmm.
did we get there? Government involvement, government
Yeah.
mandates, bills from Congress. Bill Clinton signed it. Well, now we've got the
Hmm.
government forcing 10% ethanol, and it's screwed up all. Why are we using it? So, the government caused that problem. So, why would we think that the government would be able to now fix this problem with another bill that mandates another type of energy? The solution, of course, is to get rid of the bill that requires 10% ethanol, get rid of the government regulations on that, and you don't replace it with another one that
Hmm.
sets some arbitrary percentage made up by some person in Washington D.C. about how much wind or solar or this, that, or the other thing. That like that, it seems crazy to me to recognize that we have got a screwed up system right now because of the government involvement, and then to turn around and say we need more government involvement. It's like the government was the one that created this problem in the first place and created all these inefficiencies and in this improper use of corn or whatever it is and blah 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 blah. So then you're going to turn around and say, oh, let's have the government do it. Whereas you just admitted that technology and human progress has made it so we've made progress on biofuels, right? So
Tons. Yeah.
why not wait for technology to get to a place where the it's economically feasible to have these energies instead of trying to prematurely force it on people with more government involvement, which you admit caused the problem in the first place.
I mean, I would agree that the oil subsidies are a huge problem. Basically, oil is artificially lower than it should be because we were subsidizing these oil companies that are already the most profitable companies that have ever existed, and then they're basically tasked with a very easy feat, right? The carbons that make up the gasoline, which is the 85, 87, those are actually carbons that are linked together. How many carbons are linked together? So by them just going and just taking those carbons out of the ground and then refining it, which is incredibly easy compared to biofuels, right? So algae biofuels, we have to make the tanks, we got to make the algae strains, we got to do all the bioengineering, we got to do the genetics, we got to do the molecular biology, then we got to pay the guy that's going to do the ponds, then we got to pay the guy that's going to extract it, then that's going to make the carbon, extracting it from the algae, and then finally we have the biofuel, after that. So it's those two things. It's like we've incentivized and really, I would agree with you. We through tax cuts made it a lot easier for the easier technology to come forward. And then we look at biofuels and we're like, well, why is it so expensive? Why isn't it where it is? It's like, well, because there just hasn't been the financial incentive to in order to do that. It takes a lot of money in order to do that.
Yep.
Do you agree with about fossil fuel subsidies for the fossil fuel companies?
Oh, I think that's overstated.
Okay.
Usually what people mean when they refer to fossil fuel subsidies is, um, they take basically the tax code and deductions that apply to all companies, and then when an oil company uses the same thing, then they say it's a fossil fuel subsidy. So, for example, if you own a business and you purchase a bunch of computers for the office, you can expense that out, and that lowers your company's taxable income because you just spent a bunch of money on computers for your office, right? That's an expense. Okay, so then an oil company does it, and an oil company buys a bunch of computer and expenses it and lowers their taxable income by using it, and all of a sudden it's a fossil fuel subsidy. So I think there's a lot of misleading statements about fossil fuel subsidies. It's like, no, fossil fuel companies take advantage of the same parts of the tax code that everybody else does, and you're just blaming it on a subsidy. Of course, the fact is that fossil fuel companies, far from being subsidized and benefited in the market by the government, they're actually under vicious assault and vicious attack by the government and by ESG standards and everything else. It's very difficult to be a fossil fuel company. That's one of the most maligned and viciously attacked companies in the world right now. So much so, and they're so overly regulated, and they're being viciously attacked by the government. So far from being a subsidized industry, it's actually an industry under attack.
Yeah, I mean, they. I mean, I guess I would agree with you that they are subject to a lot of regulations because they're doing a lot of things that are, impacting how we live. So it kind of, yeah. I mean, I guess I don't have I just have the Wikipedia. I just brought up that they may be the fossil fuel subsidies. I don't know the exact code, but this is what Wikipedia says. It's not a good source, but this is what I have right now. The tax breaks on consumption, such as lower sales tax on natural gas or residential heating, or subsidies on production, such as tax breaks on exploration for oil. So I don't know. I don't know what that actually
I mean,
draws down to.
philosophically, I'm
Mhm.
against subsidies for any industry, just sort of philosophically.
Okay.
Their national security concerns, I think, are a little bit different. I'm okay with the federal government subsidizing industries that are
Hmm.
national security concerns. Like, I think we should be able to make food. I think we should be able to make medicine. I think we should be able to make steel, things like that that have sort of a national security implication. I'm okay with, and frankly, energy too, because there's a significant amount of national security that comes into play with energy. But
Okay.
but philosophically, I'm not in favor of any kind of government subsidies. But what I find telling is that it's actually the green energy and the renewable energies that really need the subsidies in order to even have a chance at surviving. For example, um, electric vehicles, nobody would be able to afford them without massive tax breaks for electric vehicles. Nobody
Hmm.
would be able to charge their electric vehicles without the government paying to build a bunch of charging stations. Of course, the government never had to pay to build gas stations. Gas stations were built without any government money, without any taxpayer money. I think if electric vehicles want to go around and build a bunch of electric vehicle charging stations, they should do it the same way the gas stations did it, with their own money.
Hmm. Okay. I mean, do you like what are your thoughts on like market-based solutions for kind of like making like for example, the cap and trade California's cap and trade system for companies and stuff
I
like that.
yeah, I think calling cap and trade a market based solution is very misleading, very
Okay. How
misleading.
so?
That's because when you say a market based solution, that's implying that this is the free market that's doing it, and that the free market is going to come up with this. That's what I'm in favor of. I'm in favor of the actual free market, actual entrepreneurs, capitalism, private equity. That is the one that is what's going to bring us out of this, and develop real renewable energy. When you talk about cap and trade, what you're talking about is a government regulation, a government controls on how much carbon people can emit. So I think to call cap and trade market based solution, I think is purposefully misleading to try to make people think that this is a free market solution when it's actually government control.
Yeah, it's definitely government control, right? Because they're saying how much you can emit, and the products that you're emitting has to be this amount,
Yeah.
and that could be arbitrary based off of whatever they do. But there are big wins that have come from that. So, for example, Tesla makes hundreds of millions of dollars off of the cap and trade system for in California, and that's kind of like how that was actually how they kind of like started their whole profitability was as a company was using that. And I remember in 2020 I was reading all these things about man, when Ford and all these other companies start making the switch to EVs, is Tesla even going to survive as a company, because they're going to lose out on all that money. So it's kind of an interesting idea. So there are some, I
Yeah,
guess,
I
some
wouldn't say that's
winners.
a good. I wouldn't. I mean, yeah, Elon Musk is a winner. I don't think society's a
Yeah,
winner from that.
yeah. You don't think that we benefit, that Tesla's like a world company that's famous now? That
Not really. I think California is suffering significantly because of things exactly like that. Frankly, I don't even know about California's cap and trade system. I just know that California is extremely overregulated. Everything costs more there, and no, I don't think having government get involved in, and first of all, I don't think it's a legitimate goal of government to try to reduce carbon emissions in the first place. So why would I support them implementing some complex trading system for carbon when I don't really care how much carbon's not CO2 is not a pollution.
Yeah, I guess it's how much we place kind of like a monetary amount on the cost of the environment, right? And the value that we give as an environment. I mean, it's interesting that you brought up the Amazon a couple of times. Like other than like you've gone there, which I'm totally jealous of, by the way. I wish I could go.
Oh, it's
Like
awesome.
what is like why conserve the Amazon rainforest in your mind?
I mean, I think we should conserve the Amazon rainforest for the same reason I think that we should conserve the Custer-Gallatin National Forest, which is 45 minutes away from here. It's one of the biggest national forests in the United States. Um, I think humanity has a spiritual connection with the creation. I think that I mean, my some of my most spiritual experiences have occurred in nature. I think there's a reason why God wants to be worshipped as the creator. I think there's really something special about that. There's a reason that when Jesus Christ went to pray, Jesus Christ went to the top of the mountain to pray. This is a long-standing, and you see that in a lot of other sort of religious figures as well. So and my own personal experience in nature and in forests and stuff, I think it's worthy to conserve that stuff. And so um, again, I just like that's, and frankly, like I'm not even like full, like if I was like a full blown libertarian, like I would be in favor of like privatizing all of the forests. And actually, there's actually a pretty strong argument in favor, like there's a really strong libertarian argument in favor of privatizing all of our forests, because when you
Mm-hmm.
privatize the forest, that private owner then oftentimes takes better care of it than the government. Now the counter argument is, well, you really there's more of an incentive to destroy it if you own it privately, and that's more likely what would happen. And I think that's a fairly decent argument too. So, but I mean, part of what's being a conservative is recognizing that generations that have come before us have come up with some good ideas, and so
Mm-hmm.
there are certain things that maybe if I had to start from scratch and do it, I wouldn't do it that way. But I recognize that um, that previous generations of Americans have put forth this system that we have, where we preserve our national forests, we preserve our national parks, and um, I think it's arrogant to just throw out everything that previous generations have done. And so that's one thing that I can't stand about liberals and Democrats is they think that they're the only smart ones to ever live, and that we can throw out
Mm-hmm.
everything that our ancestors came up with. So, and I just the world that I live in Montana, beautiful area. We have crystal clear waters and creeks. The air is perfectly clean. We have these beautiful national forests and mountains we can go spend time in. I just don't think it's a good idea to change that. We've had
Mm-hmm.
this system for a long time. It's worked very well. It's a wonderful quality of life. We have clean air, clean water, beautiful forests. I'm just not in favor of doing major changes to that traditional conservation work that's happened. Not this new age type of global warming stuff, but traditional environmentalism, traditional conservation. And so I view it the same way. Like the Amazon, I view as the same way as our forests here in the United States. Like um, I think it's just good to conserve it for kind of all those reasons.
I'm really interested in like how your spirituality links you to your like, conservation of the the environment, or how your traditional conservation of the environment, because it's interesting like doing research on how different religions see that idea, the conservation of the environment actually being something that they need to do as part of their like spirituality. It's interesting, like a lot of different religions are actually pull very differently on how that impetus that they feel in order to conserve. And it's like and it's and out of all of the religions, it seems like the United States evangelical Christians are the lowest out of Jewish people, all the different types of religions that exist, and the United States at least. I guess, and it's rare to hear that, because when I talk to a lot of Christians, it's like God gave us this earth, we're going to use it kind of mentality. So I guess I'm just like curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the reason you see that in the polling is because of the way the American left has politicized environmentalism for partisan reasons, and so I think a lot of Christians are gonna get that polling question, and they're gonna recognize environmentalism as basically a Trojan horse for communism, which in a lot of ways it is. And so I think you see a lot of that come through with American Christians, where they recognize that. Um, I think all Christians recognize that we're supposed to be good stewards of the earth. It's actually pretty ironic. Like, you look at like Christians in rural parts of America where we don't believe in man-made global warming, but we're the ones that actually are spending time in nature. And then you get big city folks who've lived in big cities and concrete jungles their whole life, and they're the ones that are all crazy about global warming. I think that says quite a
Yeah.
bit. And basically everybody that I know that's like a Christian that's like in Montana, they all believe in taking good care of the environment. Like farmers and ranchers I know are extremely good stewards. Hunters, people that go hunting, these are people that take care of the environment better than any big city liberal I've ever heard of in my life. People don't believe in littering, don't believe in polluting, stuff like that. Taking very good care of the environment. It's actually, it's ironically, it's the big cities that are the most damaging towards the environment, and I think it says quite a lot about. I think it says quite a bit. Well, I guess number one, I mean, when you look at the actual studies about mental health, you see that people that live in big cities have significantly lower quality of mental health. And there's all sorts of studies that talk about how even spending 20 minutes in nature a week will like significantly increase your mental health. So the way I view it is you've got all these atheist liberals living in big cities with horrible broken down mental health systems that never spend any time in nature, and then they view global warming as sort of this like religious experience so that they can feel better about themselves.
I I totally agree that being in like nature definitely improves your mental health, man. Like I say, surfing and getting out in nature and seeing the dolphins swim underneath you and seeing the sea lions and the you know it's crazy, snorkeling and you're seeing these huge reef forests, down there, and it's awe-inspiring. It makes me feel so small, and it makes
Yeah.
me feel just in love with it. And that's why I got into biology. I feel like is because of those moments, going and having that connection with nature. And yeah, I mean, that's just I want to preserve that basically for future generations. I want my kids to be able to go and like go to these natural places and in the mountains and be able to see like the dragonflies flying around with the creeks and the frogs croaking and the crickets. And there's something about that makes me just feel so um like warm.
Yeah,
And
totally.
yeah, it's
Totally.
it's cool. I mean,
And I agree with I agree with conserving and preserving that for future generations. I would submit to you that giving the government more power is the last thing you want to do if you're concerned about actually preserving the environment. If you actually look throughout human history, some of the worst environmental abuses and environmental disasters have been a result of governments having too much power. And so, frankly, I think the United States has had a wonderful system for a long, long time with private property rights, national forests, conservation, pollution regulations, sort of status quo from the 90s and 2000s. What I'm opposed to is this sort of give the government more power, force all of these energy changes, force a bunch of people into poverty, not be able to afford their electricity bills, massive government power. Like, giving the government more power is not going to. Like, giving the government more power and control over all of our natural spaces and stuff, and you actually literally see it happening already today, where our national forests are neglected. One of the reasons we have such bad forest fires in the United States and out west here is because the U.S. government is an absolute failure at managing the forests. And I see it when I go out backpacking in the wilderness here. There's just massive amounts of fuel on the forest floor, and I think you've even seen there was a big article out of California recently about how Um, or was it no? Was it in Montana? No, there was a Montana fire that like basically stopped burning when it got to this part of the forest that had been properly managed. And so, give this idea that giving the government more power is going to result in our natural beauty being preserved, I think is exactly opposite. I think the more power you give to the government, the less likely it is that we are able to preserve our natural beauty.
Yeah, I mean, but you're talking about before with climate change and the fires. We're kind of like in this weird spot as humans where these natural cycles are occurring. There is, natural variations in climate. Like we agree that there's an ice age and now there isn't, and there's fires that happen and that's completely natural. It's a really good way of releasing a lot of detritus on the dead trees and carbon and nitrogen, and that's a really big part of allowing new growth in forests and that kind of stuff. And yet here we are as humans where we create stationary structures that we don't want to burn down, and we also kind of like live in an area in a kind of like band of like temperature or climate that if it gets too extreme one way or the other, it's not going to be habitable for us. So it's kind of like this weird area or what thing that we need to do or try to do, or maybe we're going to fail at it, right? Trying to create the stasis of nature that also is creating and preserving that biodiversity that has existed, and making nature something that we live harmoniously with, rather than like humans on top of the environment. Because we kind of know, like we were talking about before with pollution, like we kind of know that human health is tied to environmental health. But if we just pollute and we just take the environment for granted, then we're going to lose these things. A lot of them, they're called ecosystem services and ecology. So this is like, for example, bees pollinating our food. This is the majority of oxygen that we breathe, 60 to 70% of it is from microbes and algae in the oceans. So if we lose that, like how are we going to make our oxygen, kind of thing? And that's actually being impacted directly by uh, nitrogen runoff. So from farms and everything, we put everything, all this nitrogen and fertilizer into the waterways that goes out into the ocean, that causes an algae bloom that then dies. And then that causes an oxygen minimal zone where thousands of fish can go through there and have no oxygen in the water and then die. So it's there's just, yeah, we have to figure out how we're going to live harmoniously with nature, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think the United States is like doing some horrible job where we're like completely neglecting our environment and we're like massively polluting. Like that's going on in other countries around the world. Go to
We're doing
Cambodia,
good.
go to
We're doing
China.
good. Yeah.
This like that's why it's like the focus on trying to like control Americans and force all these changes on Americans when we're like the global leader in clean environment and taking care of our environment. Um, I just think is so wrong. And like, I mean, you talk about like nitrogen causing algae blooms. Like Republicans and conservatives like are not opposed to controlling that. I mean, look, Ron DeSantis was dealing with in Lake Okeechobee. Lake Okeechobee was experiencing massive algae blooms, and Ron DeSantis basically took care of it. So that's something that you're not going to get a lot of pushback from conservatives on. You are going to get a lot of pushback when you say we want the iron-fisted federal government to come in and take away your cars, and we want
Mm-hmm.
your electricity prices to skyrocket, and we want to take away SUVs, and we want to ban fossil fuels, and we want gas prices sky high, and on and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that there has to be, look, you have to look at like the progress that we have been made, and it's frustrating to me, like as a scientist, specifically when there is all these breakthroughs in technology and these technologies that are in reach, that aren't like we have to wait 20 years in order to address this problem. Like we have the technologies now, it's ready. We've developed them, we have them at pilot scales, and but it's just people don't know about them. We don't talk about them. It's this focus on this doomerism, like things have to be bad. And any type of talk, I talk about like how the Inflation Reduction Act's a step forward, that is, for the first time ever, we're spending more money on engineering and science than the defense for the first time ever, if you add the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the DoD and the NSF, NIH, NOAA, all that stuff together, it's actually more than the DoD's like military spending. So there's huge progress that's being made, but we just don't talk about that. We don't. There's this doom and gloom, one thing, this one number that you care about, CO2 ppms, that's it, and we can't talk about anything else. And it's like, man, can we talk? Let's talk about something else. Let's meet people where they are. And because it hasn't been working, I follow a lot of NASA climate scientists, and they're like, man, I've been saying how CO2 ppms are bad for 20 years now, and people just don't get it. And I'm like, well, maybe we need to change it up. We need to change up how we're talking about this thing, because it's like, we're beating the same drum and we're expecting a different result, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that, but I'm not the one that you need to convince of that.
I know, and I do get pushed back from like scientists and stuff about it, where it's like, I need to, talk about CO2 and all that kind of stuff, and it is important, but it's like, I feel like you gotta live. People are living a life, you know what I mean, that are separate from some stats or some graph and stuff like that. And if you care enough about your environment and your place to not care about to care like that, you don't want it to be polluted, you care about that, you want the natural places to be connected and not these huge parking lots that are kind of like making archipelagos of nature and stuff like that, then is I don't is
There's
that a bad thing?
nobody.
Like,
I
no,
mean,
of
but
course not.
I mean, there's that's not how Americans feel. Like
Okay.
this idea that like there's a bunch of Republicans and conservatives that want
Hmm.
want dirty air and dirty water, and they want like pollution and stuff. Like that's just like I don't know what the term is for it, but that's just wrong. And like you're arguing against something that doesn't exist.
I don't think that I don't think that they want dirty water. I don't think that they want, and that's what my point is in, you said it. I mean, part of conservatism is to conserve the environment. I think that that's a natural like place, and I think that um, I mean, the whole point of talking to people, on the right or Republicans or whoever you want to like identify, like, is to kind of like show that like we can have a conversation and we can like talk about this stuff without like straw manning each other and stuff like that. And I don't think, um, yeah, I don't think it's as bad as the media portrays it and stuff. And it's not as doomer as the media portrays it, and people aren't as bad as uh as the media portrays it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I'm convinced that there's got to be about 40% of Democrat voters out there that have no idea how radical left the Democrat Party has gone, and that would never vote for the Democrat Party if they knew that they were trying to ban fossil fuels and ban cars and do
Hmm.
all this insane stuff. So I think there's a lot of truth to that. That like the American people are not as far apart as our politics would make us seem. Um, but I mean, when you just started talking about like, oh, there's all this progress, like we're spending more on this, that, and then than we are on the military, like that's a pure political statement.
Hmm.
Politics at its core is one of the most important aspects of Congress is appropriations and how do we spend money. And so when you
Yeah.
start arguing about that, that is pure politics. That's not
Yeah.
science anymore. That's pure politics. And most people would not consider that to be progress, especially when you recognize that military and national defense is the primary role of the federal government. That's the primary reason we have it. If you read the Federalist Papers, the first 10 Federalist Papers are all about national security and why we need a federal government for security and military reasons. So when you start saying, "Oh, we want to take money," or it's a good thing that we're spending money on something that's not even in the Constitution, and we're not spending as much on the number one most important job of the federal government. I mean, that's a political statement that you're not going to get a lot of buy-in on from, certainly not from Republicans.
I think that if we spend that money and we see like an increase with which the Inflation Reduction Act does, it increases the manufacturing. If it creates sustainable, high-paying jobs, that creates a new market for this stuff where we're actually exporting these products. If we, if the $2 billion that went for algae biofuels actually creates more national programs to do this. And by the way, I know I have friends at the DOE, and as soon as this started, as soon as it got passed, there were meetings that started at the DOE on what to do about this. Um, if we have tangible progress being made that actually improves people's lives, then I think that we can call it progress, and it doesn't matter who you are on the political spectrum. Like it's
Yeah.
they're
And of
good
course
jobs.
the question would become, let's say government funding of this research figures out some great thing and it improves everybody's lives. Great. The question though becomes is, could that have been done with private money without using taxpayer money, without stealing from future generations? Because of course, the U.S. government is broke; they don't have any money. The money that we're spending is being printed. It's driving inflation. It's harming low-income people the worst. I find it just so disingenuous for Democrats to be so happy about all this government spending when it's the government spending that's driving inflation, which is absolutely hammering the lowest income people in our society. You've got tens of millions of Americans who can't even afford groceries right now and can't afford to pay their electricity bills because inflation is so out of control. And we're sitting here being real happy about government spending on research stuff, and it's like I don't
Yeah,
know. That's not cool.
I am not an economist, and I can't tell you how. I can't even tell you how like the Fed raising the rate actually decreases inflation. I think I might know decreasing the amount of money that's available or whatever, but do I actually know? No, I'm not an economist. I can't tell you that. But I've read the cliff notes and the important parts of the Inflation Reduction Act. And what I think that's happening is going more towards the manufacturing, the jobs, the long term. That's what I think that it was going for. But I think that, I mean, to be honest with you, my honest opinion, I think that it's kind of a weird name. I think it's a climate change bill that's also going to impact the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't think that the Fed is the one that's going to be pushing all of the monetary policy as it probably should be.
Well, they only called it the Inflation Reduction Act until it passed, and then it was a climate bill.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it is a coincidence that this thing passed after the Ukraine Russian conflict, where you have a lot of countries now in Europe that are now in this national defense position where now they're in need in order to get oil from Russia in order to exist, to have their economy working. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of legislatures, like kind of were scared of that. And it's a national defense part. The second part of it is national defense.
Yeah, and of course the reaction is the exact opposite. So Europe put itself in this position by obsessing about global warming and not promoting other fossil fuel development and trying to focus on all this green energy, and then they get into a war and they lose their one source of fossil fuels, and now they're in a tight spot because they have no other sources of fossil fuels because they've obsessing about global warming. And they say, oh well, to solve this problem we need more windmills and solar panels. And it's like, you morons, like the reason you're in this thing into the beginning is to first place is because you've got all these regulations trying to do windmills and solar panels and you don't have any other source of fossil fuels. And it's the same in the US. Like literally one of the major drivers of inflation right now is costs of energy. One of the main reasons we have costs of energy so high is because of global warming regulations and the Democrats war on fossil fuels, trying to shut down fossil fuel development. And then their solution then is to do a bunch of print a bunch of dollars and give it to windmills and solar panels. And it's like that's literally the cause of inflation. You're actually making inflation worse, and then saying that it's the Inflation Reduction Act. It's incredibly misleading. We all know that the politicians name these bills things that are the total opposite of what they do. It's like the Patriot Act in
Sure.
2001 is the exact
Yeah.
opposite of a Patriot Act. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So it's not gonna lower inflation. It's going to increase inflation, and it's going to continue to drive our energy costs higher. And the lowest income people in our society are the ones that are going to get hit the worst.
Yeah, I don't know if like the largest expansion of the federal government and the creation of the Department of Homeland Security is probably a good title for the Patriot Act.
Right.
I guess like I get in general, like, do you were talking about, you're right that this is going to cost us money in order to do these bills. There are recent reports that are saying in the long long term, going to something more renewable and sustainable might actually save us money, but let's just say that it does. Like, do you think that, because we're balancing this thing where it's like, okay, future generations we're running up the debt, and future generations might have to have impacts on that, versus like leaving them a sustainable environment. Like, do you think that we owe it to future generations to, like, at all, in order to like conserve the environment, or is it kind of just like we're conserving it for us now? Like, how do you balance those two?
No, I mean, of course. One of the reasons I'm a conservationist is I believe that we should preserve the environment for future generations. I just don't think that having the government print a bunch of dollars and waste it on windmills and solar panels is going to achieve that purpose. I think the better way to get there is to get the government out of the way, let the free market do its job, and let us have, in the meantime, let us have cheap and reliable, safe, secure, clean fossil fuel energy, and let the private sector do its job, and let entrepreneurs and capitalists come up with alternative energy sources. And I have full confidence in human ingenuity that someday, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20 years, we will come up with energy technology to replace fossil fuels. The problem is we don't have it right now. And this is really causing a lot of problems in our everyday lives. And I don't think that's fair to future generations to take out a bunch of debt to fund these, pie in the sky dreams about windmills and solar panels that the future generations are going to have to pay off. They're going to have to pay that debt back.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we have the technology to replace fossil fuels. Algae biofuels can immediately swap in there. It's just that we don't do it. That's the thing, right? It's an oil. It's everything would be the same. It's just renewable and sustainable. Would you agree?
I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I would assume
Okay.
that I would, if we can do that, that would obviously cost trillions and trillions of dollars. You
Yeah, I
can't
don't know the
we
exact
like
cost
I've
of
never
algae biofuel.
like if you actually think that we can just get rid of fossil fuels and replace it with green and renewable energy and just totally stop using fossil fuels, like that sounds totally
Yeah.
outlandish to me, totally ridiculous. Like that's not possible without spending probably $50 trillion.
I mean, it would be if we were looking at it under an electric vehicle kind of lens, where now you're right, we have to do all these mining and all that kind of stuff. But, or what I was talking about before, but where it's like, algae biofuels could actually use our existing infrastructure. It's the only technology that I know of that could do that actually, and use our existing cars, our everything that we already have. It's
That's
it's
great.
not a complete redo.
That's
And
awesome.
I think,
I mean, I'm not an expert on algae biofuels. I don't know anything about them. If it's
okay,
this wonderful, wonderful technology, awesome. I build let's start using it. Like that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
cool.
I just don't want the government forcing it on anybody.
Yeah, yeah.
But
The nice thing.
I'm all in favor of new technology and new energy. I'm 100% pro new technology and pro new energy. I'm just opposed
Nice,
to
man.
the government forcing it on people. And so I don't know anything about algae biofuels. If it's this wonderful thing, that's this wonderful awesome thing, then I don't have great. Let's use it. I don't have any issue with that.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, it's like, I'm convinced, like that, the future for renewable fuels and stuff is just kind of like drop in technologies where you're not actually impacting the 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 consumer. You're not the consumer's going every day, and they're turning on and off the same light, and they're going into the same car, but the energy that's going into that car, that energy that's giving the electricity, is renewable. And if we can do that, and decrease costs of the service, so it decrease the cost of the fuel over time, and decrease the cost of electricity through solar panels and wind turbines and stuff like that, and like we were talking about, hydroelectric and nuclear, then I think that people would be down for it. It's just, and I agree with you that this overly authoritarian, like I'm going to choose how your life is going to be message is inherently bad, because you're going to get people that just say no to authoritarian, full stop, doesn't matter what it is. And then it might or might not pan out, right? Because that it's just, we think that it might be, but then we don't actually know 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I think if these new technologies are just these awesome, wonderful things, then
Hmm.
you shouldn't need the government to force it. You shouldn't need subsidies. You shouldn't need all this stuff. People should just adopt it if it makes economic. It's like it's like solar panels on the people's roofs. I mean,
Yeah.
if solar panels are dirt cheap and easy to manufacture and they're economic, then everybody can buy solar panels and put solar panels on the roofs, and then we wouldn't need electricity generation for residential use anymore. We could all just have solar panels on a roof. Problem is, the tech's not there.
Yeah, battery technology, that's the problem, right? Battery technology is inherently like inefficient, and that's the kind of the thing. And um I think that there are like solutions where it's like we're not depending on a grid so much, that we have like, home batteries, something like that. But then how are people going to afford that, right? How are people going to afford having a battery for their entire house? I've heard people say that they could use their electric vehicle as a car, but then that would rely on everyone getting an electric vehicle, and that's just like too much. And a lot of people that I talk to, they don't even want a car. So the idea that now we're gonna, everyone's gonna have an electric vehicle is a lot. So it's a tough issue. But I think that my point, and the point of my channel, to wrap up, and I appreciate talking to you. I appreciate the discussion
Yeah,
and
man.
the pushback.
Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, and I think like the whole point of my channel is to kind of like talk about the wins in science and this cool stuff that's happening. The taglines like that I use is like the cool stuff in science that nobody's talking about. So there's like, cool breakthroughs like them. One of my favorite labs just cured genetic blindness in mice by delivering a nanoparticle that was adorned with little virus parts. So it goes right to the eye, and then it goes and turns on the genetic machinery through CRISPR in order to make the mice see. And they use little probes in its mind to see whether or not it was turning on or not. So stuff like that, that's just like the new. I want it to seem like science fiction. This stuff's so cool, and that's the
Cool.
stuff that I get like really jazzed at. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome.
cool, man. Well, good luck in CS:GO. That was those were some sick clutches last night. I saw that.
Oh
The
man.
Watch the
Thank you.
replay if you
Oh man, I should download those matches. Holy cow.
they were good, man. They were. I respect three clutches back to back to back to come out with the. So it was it was
Man, is
awesome,
that
man.
what happened? I do need to get on and download that match.
I think it was 13-14
Okay.
or 12-14, and then there was three wins in a row. It was
Well,
pretty
thank
sick,
you.
dude.
Thank you.
I don't respect the auto
Fair enough.
sniper. I'm not.
Nobody does. Nobody does. It's all right.
All right, man. Well, if you ever have like a science thing that you want to talk about, or some science news that you think is cool, just shoot me a a message on Discord, and I'm down to talk.
Cool, man. Thank you so much. Good chatting.
All right. All right.